Hello everyone, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Spoken, which is a cool new online service that offers flexible and tailored English lessons delivered by your personal teacher straight to your phone using all of your favourite messaging apps including WhatsApp, WeChat, Viber and Facebook Messenger. All the content comes straight to your phone from your teacher in the messaging app. The lessons are pretty short and they combine bits of listening, speaking, reading and writing to help you to improve your English for all kinds of different situations. And Spoken are offering you 2 free lessons and then 20% off all of their course packages. Go to getspoken.com/LEP or click a Spoken logo on my website. You're listening to Luke's English Podcast. For more information, visit teacherluke.co.uk. Hello there, hello, and welcome to another episode of Luke's English Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you about one of my favourite stand-up comedians from the UK, and we're going to hear some of his comedy and use it to learn English. I'm talking about a comedian called Bill Bailey, who's very well known in Britain and very successful. He's been on TV a lot, does lots of live shows where he tours the country and things like that. I've been a big fan of Big Bailey. That's not his name. I'll start that again. I've been a big fan of Bill Bailey since I first saw him on TV in the late 1990s, I think, and I'm glad to say I once saw him performing stand-up in Hammersmith, which is where Bill lives and where I used to live too. It wasn't in his house, it was nearby, but anyway, he does live in the town of Hammersmith, and I went to see him in Hammersmith, and he happens to also live in Hammersmith. Who is Bill Bailey? So, Bill Bailey is an English comedian, primarily a stand-up comedian, but also a musician, actor, TV radio presenter and author. Bill Bailey is known for his role in the TV show Black Books. That's probably where most people know him. Certainly if people probably listening to this, that's the place that you're probably going to know him from. Black Books, which is that brilliant comedy show which came out of, I guess, the UK and Ireland, because it was written by an Irish writer and it had an Irish comedian in it as well. But one of the characters was called Manny, and the character of Manny was played by Bill Bailey. That's probably where he's best known. And Manny in that show is similar to Bill Bailey in a way. He certainly looks like Bill Bailey, which you would expect, considering Bill Bailey was the actor who was portraying him. Anyway, also, as well as being on Black Books, he's been on other things, like, for example, Nevermind the Buzzcocks, which is like a music-themed sort of comedy quiz show, a panel show. Also, Have I Got News For You and QI, as well as his extensive stand-up work, including his DVD specials, such as Part Troll and Dandelion Mind. Bill Bailey was listed by the Observer newspaper as one of the 50 funniest acts in British comedy in 2003. In 2007 and again in 2010, he was voted the 7th greatest stand-up comic on Channel 4's 100 Greatest Stand-Ups. In this episode, we're going to listen to some of Bill's comedy and then we're going to understand it all so that you can hopefully enjoy it as much as a native speaker would. So lots of language, lots of listening and all the usual stuff that you would expect. Obviously, since we're talking about comedy and we're going to be listening to comedy, which I personally find very funny, obviously your enjoyment of comedy is subjective. Like everyone's enjoyment of this kind of thing is always subjective. And what's funny to one person isn't funny to another person. But the vast majority of what goes into appreciating a comedian is, of course, being able to actually understand the things that they're saying. So don't judge it until you fully understand it. I hope that there's a lot for you to learn from this episode and that you also enjoy it and find out about a very funny comedian who has lots of videos on YouTube and DVDs that you can buy and enjoy over and over again. Let's talk now a little bit more about Bill Bailey, and then we can hear some of his comedy. So here are a few little things that you should know that might help you to appreciate his humour a bit more. So the first thing is his appearance. He's got quite a funny appearance, or an unusual appearance. He looks a bit like an old hippie or something, even though he doesn't really associate with the hippies. Apparently he associates more with the punk movement, and he's probably of that generation, but he looks a bit like an old hippie. He's got kind of boggly eyes. His eyes kind of stick out a bit, especially when he does certain expressions with his face. It makes his eyes kind of stick out. He's got a bald forehead and long, straggly hair down the back and the sides, and a kind of a round face. With an expressive face that often takes sort of... he looks kind of confused or surprised, that kind of face. Now, that description sounds almost mean, really, but Bill also is a lovely person, and he's quite kind of cuddly and amusing just to look at. And he uses his appearance well, making himself look like a crazy person, and I think it sort of helps to gain laughs. But inside, I think he's a very down-to-earth guy with a good sense of humour. Now, what about his type of comedy? It's basically a bit weird, a bit strange, a bit surreal. Quite cerebral means it's kind of brainy and intelligent. And it generally sort of considers the stranger aspects of life. He's the sort of comic that some people would say was a bit random. Meaning that he's a bit strange and he tends to look at life from a different angle. He doesn't just do ordinary observational comedy, but instead his work is full of musical parodies and existential thoughts and things like that. So there's music, there's a bit of left-wing politics, there's some mentions of drugs and also local culture. So in terms of the music, he's a brilliant musician. I mean, he's amazing. It seems that he can play any instrument and do anything he wants on all those instruments. It's really amazing, and he uses the music really, really well in his comedy, and he does parodies of different types of music, like parodies of songs and parodies of classical music. He mixes different styles together, sort of observing the fact that, for example, certain bits of classical music seem to have bits of Cockney music, or rock songs have borrowed bits of music from classical and stuff like that. It's very clever. The left-wing politics, it doesn't come into it much, but he is a member of the Labour Party, and his political views come into his comedy in various ways, as he tends to sort of make fun of certain aspects of capitalist culture, the consumer culture, celebrity culture, and things like the establishment as well. So drugs, they come into it sometimes when he makes references to certain drugs, like weed, for example, or generally, it seems that Bill has probably taken a few drugs in his time, as is evident in his surreal style and his existential musings, and maybe that kind of acid-burned hippie look that he seems to have. Hammersmith, this is where he's from. It's in West London, where I used to live, but Bill also grew up in the West Country. That's the kind of southwest of England. So he has a slight West Country accent. So in the West Country, people sort of speak like this. You know, it's slightly West Country accent. You kind of associate it with a farmer or something. Anyway, he's got a bit of that sort of West Country accent, and he also lived in Wales, although that's not really evident in his accent. But generally, he speaks a kind of received pronunciation with a West Country or London twang. He speaks, you know, like most people you would meet in West London, I think. So let's now listen to a few clips, and then I'm going to explain what you hear. There are so many clips of Bill Bailey on YouTube, and I basically like all of them, but I'm going to play you probably about 5 things taken from various TV appearances and live shows over the years. Don't forget, you can get Bill Bailey's DVDs. There are many of them. I think my favourite one is called Part Troll, which it's, I guess, a joke in the fact that he looks a bit strange. He looks like this. He could be part troll, not completely human. So most of these videos showcase his musical talents as well as his comedy, his storytelling, and so on. You'll be able to see them embedded on the page for this episode on my website. So let's get started. The first one we're going to look at is Bill Bailey talking about Beethoven, the classical music composer. And in this one, he's talking about Beethoven expressing his frustration about losing something. Okay, now what I'm going to do is play the first 2 minutes of this sketch, I think, or the first minute. Let's see how much you understand, and then I will kind of go back and explain some things. So I'm going to break it up like that. I'm going to break up the bit into a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to break it down, like break down the specific bits of language. So let's hear Bill talking about, I guess, growing up in a local town that didn't get a lot of education funding from the government, and as a result, many of these institutions had to merge due to funding cuts. So they had to kind of come together. And he says that he attended the Bovington Gurney School of Performing Arts and Owl Sanctuary. An owl sanctuary is a place where you keep owls, maybe injured owls, and you keep them there and you help them to recover and then release them back into the wild. An owl is a bird that comes out at night. They're known for appearing in the Harry Potter films, that Harry Potter has a pet owl that brings him letters and things like that. So Bill Bailey attended the Bovington Gurney School of Performing Arts. So Bovington Gurney, I don't really know where it is, but it's like some very local little place. He attended the Bovington Gurney School of Performing Arts and Owl Sanctuary. So they had to merge the school and the Owl Sanctuary. And he goes on to talk about how he studied Beethoven. I'm now going to let you listen to that, and I'll explain it in a moment when I pause it, okay?
I grew up, as I say, in the West Country. Not a great education. A lot of institutions had to merge due to funding cuts. I attended the Bovington Gurney School of Performing Arts and Owl Sanctuary. And a lot of owl duty during the day. But the education was quite broad. The musical education was excellent. I studied both classical and modern composers. I studied Beethoven. Beethoven, a fascinating character. Very lonely, embittered man. Very drunken man, slovenly, covered in dust and filth and beer. He was a very unpleasant man. He was prone to dark fits of temper. He would hurl stuff around the house and then scrawl sonatas on big blocks of cheese and then eat them to spite the world. But
Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. So he's talking about Beethoven. Obviously, it's not true. He's kind of doing one of these sort of made-up histories. He was saying that at school he studied Beethoven, who was a fascinating character, a very lonely, embittered man. If you are embittered, it means that you're sort of bitter about things that have happened to you in your life. You hold on to a lot of resentment. Embittered, E-M-B-I-T-T-E-R-E-D. Bitter is a word that you use to describe a certain type of flavour. Like a strong flavoured beer might be a bit bitter, and it sort of makes your face kind of go into a certain shape, like that. So if you're bitter as a person, it means that you're, resentful and full of, hatred and stuff like that. A very lonely, embittered man, a very drunken man, slovenly. So slovenly means lazy, covered in dust. Well, I think that's clear what that means. Covered in dust and filth and beer. And he was a very unpleasant man. Obviously, this isn't true, or maybe it is, I don't know. But I think Bill is basically being sort of... he's playing with the history, you could say. Beethoven was prone to dark fits of temper. If you're prone to something, it means that you tend to do it. It's something that you often do. And so he was prone, in this case, to dark fits of temper. Fits of temper, these are like moments where you go into a really bad mood. In bad temper, okay? He was prone to dark fits of temper, so he would often be in a very bad mood. He would hurl stuff around the house. Hurl means throw. So he'd throw things around the house and then scrawl sonatas on big blocks of cheese. So obviously this is sort of ridiculous. He would scrawl sonatas. That means he would quickly write sonatas. A sonata is a piece of classical music. He would write quickly, scrawl sonatas on big blocks of cheese and then eat them to spite the world. So he'd, write some piece of classical music on a piece of cheese and then eat the cheese just to spite the world, just to show how much he hates the world and to make everyone angry. And apparently he channeled his anger into his work, which is what we're going to hear now.
He was a genius, obviously, and he was able to channel this anger into his work. This is no more prevalent than in the classic rage over a lost penny, or the so-called rondo capriccio. Now, he'd lost a penny, he flew into a rage, but he was able to channel that rage. You can actually hear a semblance of the anger in the work, I feel. You see the sense there of the controlled. He's trying to find the penny. His cleaning lady's trying to help him find it. She's suggesting places where it might be. He can't remember. Can you think where you lost headed? You lost headed? No, I can't remember where it is. Have you checked your pockets? Course I have, you stupid bitch. I'm paraphrasing from the German there, obviously.
Okay, so that's, what is it, Beethoven's Rage Over a Lost Penny, which apparently was inspired by an argument that he had with his cleaning lady when he lost a penny. And you know when you lose something, it's extremely frustrating, right? You're like, where is that thing? I'm trying to find my keys. Or have you seen my penny? And the person who's with you will usually say the same things, like, can you think where you last had it? Where were you when you last had it? Can you think where you last had it? And of course you go, no, I can't remember where it is. Have you checked your pockets? That's the other one. Have you checked your pockets? And Beethoven apparently was like, of course I have, you stupid bitch. So it's just an example of how Beethoven's domestic life may have come into his work.
You see the sense there of the controlled. He's trying to find the penny. His cleaning lady's trying to help him find it. She's suggesting places where it might be. He can't remember. Can you think where you lost headed? You lost headed? No, I can't remember where it is. Have you checked your pockets? Course I have, you stupid bitch. I'm paraphrasing from the German there, obviously.
All right, so that was Bill Bailey talking about Beethoven. We're going to move on to one of the things that he does really, really well, and that is making fun of bits of music, especially TV themes. And now, this is where Bill, I think he was performing in Australia a few years ago, in Melbourne, I think, at a comedy festival. And he did this bit, which is maybe my favourite bit that he does, and it's about Starsky and Hutch, the TV show. I don't know if you have Starsky and Hutch or if you had Starsky and Hutch where you're from, but basically, here are a couple of things you need to know about Well, actually, I tell you what, let me play the first part of his set before he starts talking about Starsky and Hutch, when he arrives and he makes a joke about his appearance and a few other little jokes. So we'll do that, and then we'll deal with the Starsky and Hutch stuff. So here are a few little jokes at the beginning of Bill Bailey's stand-up set from 1997, I think in Australia? No, Montreal. Not Australia at all. It was in Canada, at the Just for Laughs festival in Montreal. So just, can you understand the first few jokes he makes, and then we'll do with the Starsky and Hutch stuff. Here we go.
Star lost on his way to Lollapalooza? Nope. From England, it's Bill Bailey.
Hello, my name is Bill Bailey. 1982 Meatloaf Lookalike Regional winner. I've had some tough jobs. Toughest job I've ever had, selling doors door to door. Imagine that. Bing bong, good afternoon, can I interest you in it? Oh, you got one, haven't you? I used to hang out at the park. Used to go out to the park, be with my mates, the squirrels. I don't know if you know it. Squirrels, big dope heads. Yeah. You watch them in the park, you think they're nibbling on a nut. They're not. They're actually rolling a little joint. They're like that. Now.
Okay, right. So did you get that? There were like three things there, I guess. About three things. First one was a joke about his appearance, and he said, what was it? I'm the regional Meatloaf lookalike. I'm the regional runner-up in the Meatloaf lookalike. Meatloaf. Do you know who Meatloaf is? He's a rock star, musician guy. Sort of kind of a bit fat, long, straggly hair. And, I mean, Bill Bailey doesn't really look like Meatloaf, but he looks a bit like Meatloaf, enough for him to make a joke about it. And it's very normal for stand-up comedians, when they go up on stage, the first thing that they do often is to make a joke about their appearance. You know, like Paul Taylor sometimes, not so much anymore, but a few years ago, people sometimes say he looks like Harry Potter. Okay, he looks a bit like Daniel Radcliffe. Less so these days, but he used to. So Paul used to come up on stage and go, I know what you're thinking. When did Harry Potter start doing comedy? You know, and usually that kind of thing gets a laugh. So it's very common for comedians to talk about their appearance.
Lollapalooza? Nope. From England, it's Bill Bailey.
Hello, my name is Bill Bailey. 1982 Meatloaf lookalike regional winner.
1982 Meatloaf lookalike regional winner. And everyone goes, oh yeah, he does look a little bit like Meatloaf.
I've had some tough jobs.
So this is where he's talking about the jobs that he used to do. The first one was selling doors door to door. So if you sell something door to door, it means you go from one door to the next door to the next door trying to sell stuff. So you might be selling, you know, like kitchen goods, you know, like washing materials and things, or pots and pans for the kitchen, or encyclopedias or dictionaries, as they used to do before the internet, selling them door to door. Knock, 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 or ding dong. Hello, I just wonder if I could interest you in this encyclopedia. No? Okay, thank you. Have a good day. Bye. Next door. Ding dong. Hello, just wondering if you'd like to buy a fantastic encyclopedia. No? Okay. So it's a tough job selling things door to door. But imagine selling doors door to door. Obviously, what would happen is you go ding dong. Hello, I wonder if I could interest... Oh, you've already got one. Okay.
Toughest job I've ever had, selling doors door to door. Imagine that. Bing bong, good afternoon, can I interest you in it? Oh, you got one, haven't you? I used to hang out at the park.
I used to hang out at the park. So this is when he's talking about squirrels. Squirrels, you know what they are. They're these cute little animals that run around climbing trees. They've got long bushy tails. They're cute and lovely. Basically, they're rats with nice tails. But, you know, for some reason we love them and we hate rats. I don't really know. It's all about the tail, apparently. This is the thing that this is how we judge rodents, or whatever they are, rodents. The tail. Got a good tail? We love you. Got a bad tail, we hate you and we will kill you. We will find you, we will hunt you down, and we will kill you. Anyway, so he's talking about squirrels here, these lovely little creatures in the park. If you've ever observed squirrels in the park, you'll see they run around, they get nuts and things, and they kind of sit there with the nuts between their two hands, very close to their mouth, and they're very kind of paranoid and looking from left to right, always trying to see if someone's there, while holding the thing right in front of their face. And Bill Bailey says they're not actually eating nuts, they're actually rolling little joints, like that. A joint is a spliff, how would I say that? A spliff, a joint, a reefer. That's how you smoke marijuana, weed, cannabis. Roll it into a joint and smoke it. So apparently squirrels are not eating nuts, they're just rolling little joints.
Used to go out the park, be with my mates, the squirrels. I don't know if you know it. Squirrels, big dope heads. Yeah. You watch them in the park, you think they're nibbling on a nut. They're not. They're actually rolling a little joint. They're like that.
At this point, Bill is doing a very good sort of bit of visual comedy, pretending to be a squirrel, acting like a squirrel would do if it was rolling a joint.
Now, I'm a big fan of lying around scratching.
I'm a big fan of lying around scratching. I'm a big fan of lying around scratching as well. And watching TV shows. Cop shows.
And cop shows.
Cop shows. Okay, so this is where he starts talking about Starsky and Hutch. So, you know Starsky and Hutch, don't you? TV show from America, was on TV in the 70s. That's a bit of the music. This is the music from Starsky and Hutch. You can hear it's very cool. It's kind of like this 70s funk stuff. It's brilliant. Everyone loved Starsky and Hutch. And at this point, Bill is going to talk about Starsky and Hutch. So here are just a few things. It was a show about two cops in the 1970s with groovy music, as you can hear. Lots of dramatic cop action. Sometimes they were on a stakeout. If cops are on a stakeout, it means they're sitting in a place watching somewhere. Like they're watching a house or watching a building, and they're sitting there in their car maybe. Now, American cops always have loads of food in the car. That's kind of a cliche about American cops. They eat donuts and Danish pastries, and they've got coffee. You know, cops on a stakeout in the 70s. And they drove a cool, fast car, like this red car with a white stripe down the side. And they had an informant who kind of gave them news about the street. What's going on in the street, man? The informant was called Huggy Bear. And sometimes they would have fights with criminals and like mafia guys and things like that. And they would often have car chases in this amazing red car, and they would always drive the car down alleyways, like these spaces between buildings. They'd drive the car down alleyways with lots of cardboard boxes. There were always cardboard boxes in the alleyway, and they'd drive through all the boxes, and the boxes would fly everywhere, and it looked really good on TV. So that's Starsky and Hutch. Now, here, Bill is going to talk to you about Starsky and Hutch, specifically the music that you hear, the incidental music that you hear in the show.
And my favourites were the 70s ones. Starsky and Hutch, that was my favourite. What a fantastic show. I used to love the music as well. During the episodes, you get some fantastic music. Stakeout music. You know, they're sitting in a car, watching a drug bust across the street, and you get this kind of music. Sitting in the car, looking at each other like that. Loads of coffee, donuts, snacks here. Then it cuts to Huggy Bear in a club. Ow! What's happening? Back to the stakeout. A little cheese fondue set up there now. Then it cuts to two mafia hitmen sitting in a car down by the docks. They're mean. Back to the club. Phone goes. Huggy Bear, it's for you. What's that? Starsky and Hutch, they've been set up. I gotta warn them. And he goes running out of the club. Pausing to look at the camera. Back to the stakeout. They're roasting a pig in there now like that. Where's that applesauce? Huggy Bear comes around the corner. Get out of there, man! It's a setup. Right, chuck the pig out the window. Let's go. How about that alley? No, there's no boxes down that one. Go down that one. Yeah. Hit them. Hey! Down to the docks. There's always boxes down there. Yeah, good idea. The hitmen are waiting for him. They riddle the car with bullets. Starsky's hit. He's bleeding. Hutch leans over. To be continued.
It's brilliant. I love it. I absolutely love that stuff. Just the way he plays the guitar and all the stuff about the cop show is brilliant. There's a couple of little bits that I probably should explain. Little bits of vocab that are worth picking up.
Fantastic music. Stakeout music. You know? They're sitting in a car, watching a drug bust across the street.
Watching a drug bust. I think we know what a drug bust is when the police bust the criminals. They come in and arrest them. Watching a drug bust.
And you get this kind of music. Sitting in the car, looking at each other like that. Loads of coffee, donuts, snacks here. Then it cuts to Huggy Bear in a club.
It cuts to Huggy Bear in a club. So cuts, that's when a film, you know, moves from one scene to another. Cut. It cuts to Huggy Bear in a club. Huggy Bear is like their informant guy who's kind of down with the street, and he knows what's going on. He knows what's happening, man. He knows what's the word on the street, man. And so this is Huggy Bear in a club, so probably dancing or something.
Ow! What's happening? Back to the stakeout. A little cheese fondue set up there now.
They've got a little cheese fondue set up. So cheese fondue, it's like, what, Swiss, French Swiss, I think. A Swiss way of eating cheese. You put all the cheese in a pot, you heat up the pot, the cheese melts, and then you dip in, bits of bread and stuff like that, and get all the melted cheese. Yum, yum, yum. It's a rather complicated way to eat cheese, but it's a nice way of doing it. Anyway, so basically, Starsky and Hutch, in their stakeout, the food that they've got in the car is getting more and more complex and advanced all the time. So it started with donuts and coffee, and now they've got a fondue set in there as well.
And it cuts to two mafia hitmen sitting in a car down by the docks. They're mean. Back to the club. Phone goes. Huggy Bear.
The phone goes. So the phone goes. Ring, ring. And it's like, Huggy Bear, it's for you.
It's for you. What's that? Starsky and Hutch. They've been set up.
Starsky and Hutch, they've been set up. If you're set up, it means that someone has framed you. So I guess this means that Starsky and Hutch think that they're watching a drug bust. In fact, they're trapped. They've been set up. Someone has planned for them to be there, so they're going to attack them or something like that. So it's a setup.
I gotta warn them. And he goes running out of the club. Pausing to look at the camera. Back to the stakeout. They're roasting a pig in there now like that.
Back to the stakeout. They're roasting a pig in there like that. You know, roasting a pig. So they got a pig on a spit roast, and they're spit roasting a pig in the car now.
Where's that applesauce? Huggy Bear comes around the corner. Get out of there, man!
Get out of there, man! You've heard that in a million movies. Get out of there! It's like when, there's trouble, something's going to happen. Get out of there!
It's a setup.
It's a setup, okay?
Right, they chuck the pig out the window. Let's go! How about that alley? No.
How about that alley? Meaning, how about that alley? Let's drive down there. No, there are more boxes in this alley. Let's go down that alley. Hit all the boxes. Yay.
There's no boxes down that one. Go down that one. Yeah. Hit them. Hey! Down to the docks. There's always boxes down there. Yeah, good idea. The hitmen are waiting for him. They riddle the car with bullets. Starsky's hit. He's bleeding. Hutch leans over. To be continued.
So they riddle the car with bullets. So you imagine where there's a load of mafia guys, they've got machine guns, the car is there, and... is that my best machine gun impression? Come on, I can do a bit better than that. Something like that, I suppose. And they riddle the car with bullets. You can imagine all the bullet holes all over the car, riddled with bullets. What is it? Starsky is hit. Hutch leans over. Down, 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 down. To be continued.
We go!
Right, at this point, Bill is moving over to the piano, so he's going to do some piano stuff.
I used to do all the suspense music in Scooby-Doo.
He said, I used to do all the suspense music in Scooby-Doo. Scooby-Doo, that TV show with Scooby-Doo. And what was the other guy's name? I can't remember his name. It was Shaggy. That was it. Not the Shaggy from music. It wasn't me. Not him, but another Shaggy from Scooby-Doo. Shaggy, you'd be like, zoinks, let's get out of here, Scoob. You know, that guy? He probably never said that in your country. You probably watched Scooby-Doo and he never said that because he was probably dubbed. Anyway, Shaggy was like this kind of hippie character from the cartoon Scooby-Doo, and Scooby-Doo would be like, Scraggy, oh, all that stuff. Okay. So he said, I used to do all the suspense music, the moments of mystery or suspense. He used to do that music, apparently.
I used to do all the suspense music in Scooby-Doo. All day long, I'll be like that. Huh? I used to be a session musician, but the xylophone was a bad choice, really. Not a great deal of work for it, The best job I had was playing the inserts on the Teach Yourself language records. Écoutez et répétez.
So he's talking about when he was a session musician, he used to, play the xylophone, and he used to do the inserts on Teach Yourself language tapes. So I don't know if you've, had that kind of thing where you're like trying to learn a language from a tape or CD, and it goes, listen and repeat. Ding! And then like a noise, and then you have to repeat the thing. So that was his job. Écoutez et répétez. Ding! And that was like learning French, I suppose.
News, that scares me, I tell you, the news. Terrifying. Especially the way they present it. It's always presented in something like this, isn't it? News! News! Sit up straight, get your hair cut. Do a bit of national service. Listen to the news! Ah! Chill out, man, it's only the news. I want the news delivered in a more mellow way. Do you know what I mean? I want it eased into my living room. Maybe like the jazz news. Welcome to the jazz news. Here's the main point of the jazz news. There's a bad vibe going around the world. Stay out of trouble. Financial news now. Spread your bread around. Don't be no tight ass. We go now to the jazz weather. My man Solomon, the wise one. What's the word on the weather? The weather gonna be cool. Thanks very much. I'm Bill Bailey. See you again. Good luck to you.
Oh my god, I love it. I really do. Did you understand the jazz news?
We go now to the jazz weather.
Going to the jazz weather. What the news was?
Spread your bread around. Out of trouble.
That's it. There's a bad vibe going around the world. Stay out of trouble.
There's a bad vibe going around the world. Stay out of trouble.
Financial news. What is it? Spread your bread around. Don't be no tight ass. Which is, I guess, the way like a jazz musician would have spoken in like the 50s or something. Hey man, spread your bread around. Don't be no tight ass, man. Spread your bread around means bread means money, so spread your money around, meaning like be generous. Don't be no tight ass means don't be tight assed. Don't be no tight ass. Don't be a tight ass. Meaning don't be mean. Don't be stingy. Don't be no tight ass, man. It's kind of how the hip people used to speak, man. Like jazz musicians, man. Yo, what's happening, man? So, financial news. Spread your bread around. Don't be no tight ass.
Financial news now. Spread your bread around. Don't be no tight ass.
And then we go over to the jazz weather with my main man, Solomon, the wise one. What's the word on the weather? And he goes, what is it? Here's the weather. And that's him smoking a joint. It's going to be cool.
We go now to the jazz weather. My man Solomon, the wise one. What's the word on the weather? The weather going to be cool.
So there, I guess, I mean, just making fun of little bits of slang and language and things like that. That kind of thing, like all that cool language and stuff, a lot of the hip, groovy slang does actually originally come from like jazz musicians in America. So words like cool, groovy, hip, things like that, they come from jazz musicians in America. Let's move on to another video from YouTube here, and this is Bill talking about Stephen Hawking and his book A Brief History of Time. So not musical stuff here, slightly more cerebral type stuff.
I'm prepared.
Oh, sorry. Slightly more cerebral stuff. And A Brief History of Time, which is a book by Stephen Hawking. Do you know who Stephen Hawking is? He's one of the world's like leading physicists. I guess he's like an astrophysicist or a physicist. He's a genius. He's amazing. There was a film about him that came out not long ago with Eddie Redmayne. Anyway, you know Stephen Hawking, genius scientist, but in a wheelchair because he can only use part of his body and he communicates through a computer. Stephen Hawking wrote this amazing book called A Brief History of Time, which, you know, is a history of time, a brief history of time. And Bill Bailey's talking about how he took the book with him on holiday, but he couldn't really get into it. He couldn't really understand it.
I'm prepared to take on board anything that Stephen Hawking says. Cleverest man on the planet, most brilliant scientific mind, whatever he says, gospel. That's why I took on holiday with me A Brief History of Time. Probably the wrong choice, actually. I mean, a bottle of tequila, space opera would have done, but... I've always felt slightly undereducated. I've always been at a disadvantage. I left Bovington Gurney with a 2-2 in performing arts and a City and Guilds in falconry. So, I'm spelt slightly disadvantaged. I've always tried to better myself. Brief history of time, right. How can time have a history? Surely history is time, isn't it? And time is history, and time is an unbroken chain stretching off into the future, back into the past. And how can such a thing be brief if it is infinite? And I thought to myself, I can't even get past the title. So I put it to one side, read a bit of Tom Clancy. Now, I don't know if you've only read any Tom Clancy. It's a little bit easier to read. Although he does have a very, very coherent world philosophy. And that is good versus evil. Evil seems to get the upper hand. Good triumphs with vastly superior automatic weapons. Good. So I put it to one side. Too exciting, really. And back to Hawking. Now, what he's describing is so vast, it's almost too much for the human brain to get your head round. He's talking about the size of our planet and the size of the star, and the fact that our star, the sun in our solar system, is one of 100,000 million other stars that make up the galaxy, and this galaxy is one of 100,000 million other galaxies that make up the universe. Now that is a billion things by page 2. That's too many things. I can't think of a billion things. Billion? I don't even know where I left my keys half the time. Billion. If I think a number of things, I get to 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 things, then my eyes start to glaze over. I have to sit down and eat a Pringle sandwich. Drawing comfort as the level bread crushes the curve of the Pringle. Crush. Yum.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop there because maybe you might need a little help here because he's making some pretty oblique little jokes and things. But don't worry, I'm here to help. I'll help you understand it all. And so, it starts off with Bill Bailey saying, I would believe anything that Stephen Hawking says. He's the greatest scientific mind on the planet. Anything he says is gospel. So if something is gospel, it means it's true. We'd say the gospel truth, meaning it comes from the Bible originally, but gospel, it's sort of like slang to say it's true, all right?
Board anything that Stephen Hawking says. Cleverest man on the planet, most brilliant scientific mind, whatever he says, gospel. That's why I took on holiday with me A Brief History of Time.
That's why I took on holiday with me A Brief History of Time. And then he says, probably the wrong choice. If you imagine going on holiday, you don't necessarily want something like that. What do you want on holiday? Well, for Bill, he says, a bottle of tequila and a space hopper would have done. A space hopper, that's one of those like children's toys from the 80s or 70s. It was like an orange inflatable, thick rubber orange inflatable balloon with like a face on it and like these weird ears like it was an alien. And what you did as a kid is you'd sit on the thing and hold the ears of the space hopper and bounce up and down in the garden. That's a space hopper. So he's saying, I brought A Brief History of Time on holiday, probably the wrong idea. A bottle of tequila and a space hopper would have done.
Probably the wrong choice, actually. I mean, a bottle of tequila, space opera would have done, but... I've always felt slightly undereducated. I've always been at a disadvantage.
I felt slightly undereducated, always been disadvantaged. This is when he talks about Bovington Gurney again, which is this place, I don't know where it is. I graduated from Bovington Gurney with a 2-2 in performing arts. A 2-2, so when you get a degree from a university in the UK, the best degree you can get is a first. The next best is a 2-1. That means a second-class degree, but a higher second-class degree. The next one down, like the third level down, is a 2-2, which is like a second-class degree, second level. Okay, and so Bill graduated from university with a 2-2 in performing arts and a City and Guilds in falconry. A City and Guilds is like a really low-level qualification for basic skills. A City and Guilds it's just a simple qualification. In this case, a city and guilds in falconry. Falconry is the art of looking after birds and particularly birds of prey, falcons, flying birds, and having them land on your gloved hand. Keeping falcons, falconry. So this is just an example of his weird education that he got, like this strange degree, which was merged with, as we heard before, it was merged with the Owl Sanctuary, wasn't it?
Left Bovington Gurney with a 2-2 in performing arts and a city and guilds in falconry. So, I'm spelt slightly disadvantaged. I've always tried to better myself. Brief history of time, right. How can time have a history? Surely history is time, isn't it? And time is history, and time is an unbroken chain stretching off into the future, back into the past.
How does this bit end? Do you remember? There's a little punchline. What's the punchline?
And how can such a thing be brief if it is infinite? And I thought to myself, I can't even get past the title.
I thought to myself, I can't even get past the title. So he starts with the title of the book, and immediately he's like, how can time have a history? Surely history is time, and it's all one unbroken chain, and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, I can't even get past the title. So the book is so heavy that even the title is so dense that he can't even get beyond the title.
So I put it to one side.
So he put it to one side and he chose a book by Tom Clancy. Tom Clancy is like a well-known author in the UK, and he writes these basic, simple books about sort of army-related missions and sort of war stories, and it's very simple, easy to follow stuff, and usually it's like probably the British Army, who are the good guys, fight against some other army who are the bad guys, and the good guys win because they've got much more powerful weapons.
Read a bit of Tom Clancy. Now, I don't know if you've only read any Tom Clancy. It's a little bit easier to read. Although he does have a very, very coherent world philosophy. And that is good versus evil. Evil seems to get the upper hand. Good triumphs with vastly superior automatic weapons.
Actually, Tom Clancy's American, he's not British, but anyway, you get the idea. Kind of one of those authors who writes like basic sort of war stories. Okay, so he puts that to one side and he gets the brief history of time again.
Good. So I put it to one side. Too exciting, really. And back to Hawking. Now, what he's describing is so vast, it's almost too much for the human brain to get your head round. He's talking about the size of our planet and the size of the star, and the fact that our star, the sun in our solar system, is one of 100,000 million other stars that make up the galaxy, and this galaxy is one of 100,000 million other galaxies that make up the universe. Now that is a billion things by page 2. That's too many things. I can't think of a billion things. Billion? I don't even know where I left my keys half the time.
Billion? I don't even know where I left my keys half the time. A billion is obviously too many things, and it's only page 2 of the book.
If I think a number of things, I get to 10, 11, 12, maybe 13 things, then my eyes start to glaze over. I have to sit down and eat a Pringle sandwich.
If I have to start thinking about things, I get to, 10, 11, 12, 13, and my eyes glaze over. So if your eyes glaze over, it means, that you sort of suddenly, you get bored, or you don't understand what's going on. Right? You know when you're talking to someone, blah, 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 talking about some technical thing, and you realise their eyes have started to glaze over, and you realise you've got no idea what I'm talking about, have you? I hope that none of you out there have your eyes glazed over right now. If your eyes are glazed over, unglaze them now. So he's saying, if I have to count more than, say, 12 or 13, my eyes start to glaze over. I have to sit down and eat a Pringle sandwich. So a Pringle sandwich, you know what Pringles are, right? Everyone's got Pringles. They come in a tube. They're crisps. They come in a tube, and they're very Moorish. Once you pop, you can't stop, right, with Pringles. They're like these crisps, and you take them out of the tube, and you eat them. And they've got this curved shape, haven't they, Pringles? They all go in the tube together in this curved shape. And so he said, I have to sit down and eat a Pringle sandwich. And so apparently eating a Pringle sandwich is very satisfying for him, because it's very enjoyable to see the flat bread crushing the curvature of the Pringle. Crush, yum, yum, yum.
Drawing comfort as the level bread crushes the curve of the Pringle. Crush, yum, 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 yum. Hey. We've all done it. This is it. I was getting in the book. I was getting really bogged down with it, and I thought, well, maybe I'm reading this book the wrong way. Maybe I'm approaching it completely the wrong way. I'm looking at it like it's a scientific textbook. I should maybe come at it from an oblique angle. Maybe look at it like it's a novel or something. So I take it to a meadow with a dandelion. Like, pretend it's a bit of lightweight melodrama or something. Bit of Jane Austen, for example. Mr. Knightley, I am confused and not a little annoyed. It seems that even non-rotating black holes create and emit particles at a steady rate.
All right, so he's saying he had to change his approach to reading this book, and he decided to read it as if it was some sort of romantic novel, like a Jane Austen novel. And now he's doing sort of Jane Austen, the style of Jane Austen, but with the content of physics. And it's very good. Like this style, this old-fashioned style that Jane Austen used to use, mixed in with the stuff about physics.
Like it's a novel or something. So I take it to a meadow with a dandelion. Like, pretend it's a bit of lightweight melodrama or something. Bit of Jane Austen, for example. Mr. Knightley, I am confused and not a little annoyed. It seems that even non-rotating black holes create and emit particles at a steady rate. Oh, tush and fie, Emma. Quantum mechanics tells us the particles are created just outside the black hole's event horizon. Oh, Mr. Knightley, my synapses are shutting down. Sort of flows a bit better, doesn't it?
Okay, I can't really explain a lot of that stuff about black holes and sort of quantum mechanics and things. Oh, Mr. Knightley, my synapses are shutting down. Your synapses are like the electrical connections in your brain. I'm going to move on, and we're going to have Bill Bailey talking about learning Chinese, and also a story about how I think he was in Beijing, and he went to a restaurant and he saw all these animals in the window of the restaurant, including an owl as well. And we've dealt with what an owl is. One of those birds that comes out at night. Their head can go all the way around 360 degrees. They go like kind of make that noise, don't they? And Harry Potter had an owl. So he went to Beijing. He's been learning Chinese. He went to Beijing. He saw an owl in the window, and he decided he didn't want the owl to be killed and eaten. He wanted to save it. And how did he do it? So this is all about the complexities for an English person in China, and also about how difficult it is for an English person, in this case Bill Bailey, to learn Chinese. Now, I don't know, first, I can't say if the Chinese that Bill is speaking here is actually correct or proper Chinese. It probably isn't. But it sounds kind of funny from an English point of view, because Chinese sounds so complicated. All the different levels of intonation and the different sounds you have to make, it's so foreign to us that it sounds really extraordinary. And then there's the stuff about the restaurant, where there are all these different animals. I don't know if this kind of thing is really true, if you really do find all of these exotic animals in a restaurant window, or whether Bill Bailey is just, using artistic license. But anyway, it all makes quite a funny story. And so, hold on. So if you don't take this too seriously, okay? If you're Chinese and you're listening to the way that Bill is like trying to say Chinese words, obviously it's done for comic effect, and also the thing about the animals, well, I don't know if that's true. You can let me know if you can buy certain types of bird in certain restaurants in certain parts of China. Anyway, let's hear Bill telling this story.
So I was in China, obviously, and I wanted to learn the language, and I don't know if you've ever tried to learn Mandarin, but it's very hard, devilishly tricky, very sinuous, very exotic, very other. The sounds required to speak Mandarin are so unlike anything in our language. Wonderful sounds we make only at moments of revulsion or disgust. It's often handy to have a carton of off milk with you when learning Mandarin.
So he's saying that the sorts of sounds that you have to make when you're speaking Chinese are the sorts of sounds that are so foreign to us. We only ever make them when we're disgusted or revolted by something. And so he says it's often handy to have a bottle of off milk with you when you're learning Mandarin. Off milk. Milk that's off or milk that's gone off, obviously, is it milk that's gone past its use-by date, and it smells disgusting, right? It smells kind of like a cheese. Ugh. So he's saying it's handy to have a bottle of off milk with you when you're trying to learn Chinese.
It's often handy to have a carton of off milk with you when learning Mandarin. Nice pronunciation, thank you. And the other problem, of course, is the tones, the intonation. You know, if you get that wrong, that can radically alter the meaning of the word. I'll give you an example. The word ma in Mandarin in the different tones. Ma, 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 ma. That means mother, hemp, horse, or disappointment. That is a social disaster waiting to happen right there. Yeah, since your horse died, I've been smoking a lot of your mother. And I just wanted a bit of conversation, you know, a bit of chit-chat. I wanted to order some food off a street seller in Beijing. So I learnt the word for dumpling, which is daozi. That's the lovely quality of Mandarin. It's got a sound of like, I know what I'm talking about. No, I don't. And I learned the word hello, which is ni hao. So to help me pronounce it, I sort of physicalized the words. As I went up to it, I said, ni hao, daozi.
So here's Bill is doing like very big physical actions. Ni hao, ciao zi. Like big arm movements and things to help him pronounce it. Which actually I think is a kind of, obviously this is an exaggeration, but it is actually quite a good thing to do. If you're trying to get intonation, rhythm into your voice, and sentence stress and so on, using your hands, using your body can actually be a very good thing to do. Because speaking English, you know, speaking any language is a physical action. So it's about getting the sounds out. You use not just your mouth, but you use your whole body, your head, your arms, your shoulders, the whole thing. So actually, I think that's not a bad idea, using your body like that.
She looked terrified out of her wits. Because I presumably said, I want to laminate a cat.
She looked terrified out of her wits because presumably he said, I want to laminate a cat. To laminate something, if you get a piece of paper or card that you photocopied, you want to cover it in plastic, you'd laminate it, right? And then it's covered in plastic. So he probably was saying something wrong, not, hello, can I have some dumplings? But he was probably saying something like, I want to laminate a cat.
Because I presumably said, I want to laminate a cat. And if you think speaking is hard, the written Chinese is an enigma wrapped in a puzzle, cloaked in a mystery. Because Chinese characters, of which there are many thousand, contain all these elaborate pictograms and stories and sub-stories. The pictogram meaning I'm thirsty, when you literally translate it, it means I wasn't thirsty before, but now I am thirsty. So each one contains an elaborate backstory to the thing that you actually want. Like Painkiller is, I didn't really like David Bowie's later work, I wouldn't mind some Nurofen. Or I threw a stone into the pond, the ripples bounced off the bank. They met in the middle in a beautiful helix. A water bowl and I shared a moment. Anyway, all that being the case, would you mind calling me an ambulance?
So this is what I threw a pebble into a pond, the ripples. What is it? So if you throw a stone into water, obviously the water ripples, okay? You get ripples that come out.
Or I threw a stone into the pond. The ripples bounced off the bank.
The ripples bounced off the bank, so the ripples came out, bounced back, and they formed a helix. So they kind of all combined together to form a helix. A water vole and I shared a moment. That means a water vole, it's like a little animal, a bit like a squirrel or a rat. A water vole and I shared a moment. We looked at each other.
They met in the middle in a beautiful helix. A water vole and I shared a moment. Anyway, all that being the case, would you mind calling me an ambulance? While we were there, we went to a Chinese restaurant, because there was loads of them. And in the window, there were the familiar sights, crabs, prawns, bubbling away in tanks. But there amongst this familiar stuff was more exotic fare. A salamander in a bath, civet cats in cages, snakes slithering on the floor. And there was a cormorant looking doubly pissed off. And
a cormorant is a seabird that you don't normally see in a restaurant window, and it was looking doubly pissed off, like extra pissed off.
amongst these things, on the menu in the front of the restaurant was an owl. And not just an ordinary owl, a Eurasian eagle owl, an enormous, magnificent beast, just waiting to be on the buffet. And I'm thinking, if this is the stuff they got out the front, what have they got out of the back? Special order. A Bigfoot, a push-me-pull-you, a Lorax.
He's thinking, if this is what they got at the front, what have they got around the back? The special orders. A Bigfoot. You know what Bigfoot is? Like, what is it, Sasquatch? A Bigfoot, a push-me-pull-you. It's like some sort of mythical double-headed beast. A Lorax. I don't know what a Lorax is, but I think it's a mythical beast. Let's have a look. Lorax is... they made a movie about it as well, written by Dr. Seuss. So maybe it's not even a real animal. I don't know anyway. Some sort of mythical animal. I think this one made by Dr. Seuss. So what have they got round the back? If this is what they got round the front, what do they have round the back? The special orders.
Enormous, magnificent beast, just waiting to be on the buffet. And I'm thinking, if this is the stuff they got out the front, what have they got out of the back? Special order. A Bigfoot, a push-me-pull-you, a Lorax. A phoenix, mind you, that'd be tricky to cook though, wouldn't it? You know?
Phoenix would be tricky to cook, of course, because a phoenix, another mythical animal, is famous for coming out of the flames, right? The phoenix rises again from the flames, so it would be difficult to cook, wouldn't it? I suppose you'd have to trick it and poach it or something. To poach something is to cook it in water, like you poach eggs in water. It'd be difficult to cook a phoenix. You'd have to trick it and poach it.
Tricky to cook though, wouldn't it? You know? You'd have to trick it, poach it or something. And so we tried to buy the owl. I thought, I can't leave this owl here, you know? I mean, there was something inside me, you know? I had to do the right thing, you know? Because the goose didn't make it, you know? So... yeah, it was always weighing on my heart. So if we can get this owl out of here, that'll be a good thing, a Private Ryan moment. So there's a bit of haggling and some disastrous haggling, because, of course, you know, the only word you know is dumpling. Then trying to buy an owl in a restaurant and not get it cooked into a dumpling is quite hard. But eventually they agreed, and it was all smiles then. It was like, these crazy Westerners want a takeaway owl. So... they wrapped it in sellotape from beak to claw. Now...
so they wrapped it from head to toe, or from beak to claw, in sellotape. Sellotape is sticky plastic, what you would use to sell it. If you had a box, you were packing up a box, you would use sellotape to stick the box together.
That's quite undignified for an owl, and I'm not an expert, but I don't think that's the correct way of moving owls around. This owl was so angry. I mean, I've never seen a creature so pissed off. It was like a bloke who just got a paper cut off his eviction notice. You know what I mean? It was like...
it was so pissed off, it was like a bloke who just got a paper cut from his eviction notice. So an eviction notice is a letter that you get which says that you have to move out of your apartment or move out of your house. You've been evicted. It's a legal order which says you have to leave your house. So obviously that's going to make you angry if you get it. And he got a paper cut from his eviction notice. That's when paper cuts your skin, right? We've all experienced that. When you pick up some paper, the edge of the paper rubs against your finger and it cuts your skin. Ah! So it's... the owl was pissed off. It was like a bloke who just got a paper cut from his eviction notice.
Of his eviction notice, you know what I mean? It was like... we put it in a cardboard box marked suitable for microwave oven, the ultimate indignity. And then we put it in a taxi and drove off. And through the medium of pointing, we told the taxi driver to take us to the woods. Take us up to the woods where we can release the owl. And so we got to the woods. It was getting dark. There was the dusk. And by the light of the taxi, we tried to get the owl out of the box. And there was a bit of a struggle. It was pretty brutal. I'm thrashing around with it. And the owl's fixing me with this glare like, is this what you do in your holidays, Beardy? Sellotape up owls and drive them around in the woods. What are you doing next year? Gaffering up a gazelle, chucking it down a water slide?
This is the owl as he's trying to rescue it. The owl's looking at him going, is this how you spend your holidays? Sellotaping up owls and releasing them into the woods. What are you doing next year? Gaffer taping up a gazelle. Gaffer tape is like sellotape, but it's much stronger. It's like, grey or dark, and it's really tough tape. What are you doing next year? Gaffer taping up a gazelle and throwing it down a water slide.
And while I was thrashing with it, I'm thinking, this is the point I look up and see the headmaster of my son's school on a cycling holiday of southern China. Oh, Mr. Bailey. It's not what it looks like. It's Bill Oddie's birthday party. We're playing parcel or something.
So this is when he imagines how bad it would be if his son's teacher or the headmaster of his son's school on a cycling holiday in southern China or whatever sees him and goes, "Oh, Mr. Bailey, what are you doing?" And he has to try and make excuses, and he says, "It's Bill Oddie's birthday." Bill Oddie is a TV presenter that everyone knows in the UK, and he was famous for having TV shows about birds. Yes, that's right, on the BBC we used to have plenty of TV shows about bird watching, because bird watching is such a popular thing for us to do. We like to go out into the countryside with binoculars and look at birds. Yes. Anyway,
I was looking around for something to cut the sellotape off. We had nothing. We looked in the boot of the taxi. He had an oven glove in his boot and some nail scissors in his glove box. I'm thinking, is this just a scam? Is this an owl homing scam? Or we've just blundered into it? No, I can't think like that. So I said to him, although he didn't speak a word of English, I said, you hold the owl's talons with the oven glove and I'll cut the sellotape off the owl with the nail scissors. Now, there's not a phrase book in the world.
There's not a phrase book in the world. How would you finish that sentence? There isn't a phrase book in the world that would contain those phrases, of course. Like, you hold the owl's talons, its feet, its sharp feet, and I'll cut off the sellotape with the nail scissors. There isn't a phrase book in the world that would contain those phrases.
Not even in the getting to know you section. I tried jowls, nothing, So I was just trying to do the right thing, because, well, I felt responsible. My family there, my son's there, got to set a good example.
So at this point, Bill goes on to talk about his family and stuff, but I think I'm going to leave that one there. What do you think of Bill Bailey's comedy? I think it's excellent stuff. I think it's very clever and amusing, but as I said before, sense of humour is subjective. I hope, certainly, that some of the things I've said in this episode have helped you to understand and follow all that stuff. What I recommend, honestly, is that you go to the website and you look at those videos and you just watch them in their entirety. And since I've just done this episode and explained a lot of it, I do think you should watch it again, see Bill's sort of body movements, and you might find that you actually enjoy it a lot more, especially when you hear all of his jokes one by one without me interrupting. I want to just play a little bit more because this is from a show that I really liked. I want to do some stuff about doorbells. Let's have the doorbell bit.
We're living in very tense times. I find myself increasingly more tense and mistrustful. It's the joggers I don't trust, because they're always the ones that find the bodies, aren't they?
Did you get that? Did you get that joke? He's saying we live in difficult times, it's kind of dangerous and so on. It's the joggers I don't trust. So joggers, people who go jogging. Many joggers listen to this podcast. You might even be jogging right now. Anyway, it's the joggers I don't trust, because they're always the ones that find the bodies, aren't they? So, meaning whenever there's been a murder, it's usually the joggers who discover the body. Isn't that a strange coincidence? So it's the joggers I don't trust, because they're always the ones that discover the body, aren't they?
Good evening, Bill Bailey. Thank you. We're living in very tense times. I find myself increasingly more tense and mistrustful. It's the joggers I don't trust, because they're always the ones that find the bodies, aren't they? Coincidence? I don't think so. I was in the supermarket. I was at one of the new self-service tills. You know the ones with the 2 extra members of staff hanging around to deal with the slack-jawed Luddites as they paw ineffectually at the screen like a cat when a mouse comes on the TV. And suddenly there was this terrifying voice. Unexpected item in the bagging area. And it was me. I was walking in my street, and I get recognised sometimes. Somebody thought I was Shakira. And it's the hips, they don't lie. And 2 hoodies appeared. They're quite scary, aren't they? Intimidating. One of them said, "Are you that bloke?" And I said, "Only you can answer that." And his mate said, "Are you that bloke off the TV?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you doing walking around like normal?" Like he thought I should be hovering. So I was a little bit scared because they were outside my house. I thought I'd better change my doorbell because I wanted to deter unwanted callers. Most doorbells are quite friendly, aren't they? Oh, they're quite nice. Or, you know, maybe not that one if you've got an abduction complex. And that's actually the Pope's doorbell.
Okay. Right, I think that's enough of Bill Bailey. You're talking about the Pope's doorbell?
I'm hoping someone's going to ring. Come on, come on, come on. Who the Pope? I'm the Pope. Who the Pope? I'm the Pope.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to visit the website where you can, see all those videos and actually see the way he does them properly and all that stuff. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you have found this to be of benefits to your English. That's the general idea, and that you may have even enjoyed a couple of the jokes along the way. All right, speak to you again on the podcast soon. But for now, it's just time to say goodbye. Bye. 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 Thanks for listening to Luke's English Podcast. For more information, visit teacherluke.co.uk.